The following program contains explicit content and distressing details regarding former Indian residential schools, which may be triggering for some people. Viewer discretion is advised.
On this edition of The Fifth Estate.
Something wasn't right down there. Older boys talked about it. There was one guy, I overheard him telling that if you're going down an orchard tonight, you better be careful because there's a hole down there. I mean, a hole, were they going to plant another apple tree? I don't know.
At the Kamloops Indian Residential School, it was known as Brother Joseph's Orchard.
We talk about the apple orchard. We're going to go steal apples. One night, one of the guys says, no, we shouldn't. That's where they're burying people.
I've always known since I was a little kid that there was children that were buried.
For decades, it was a place shrouded in mystery and fear. Today, it's a suspected crime scene.
We have 200 targets of interest. Many of them have multiple signatures of burial.
I just couldn't believe it. I kept repeating it. I said, did you say 215? Yeah. 215. Yeah.
We need answers. The world needs answers. All I kept saying is, now they know. Now they know.
I'm Gillian Finley in the Tk'emlúps First Nation. Last spring, the discovery of what is now widely assumed to be unmarked graves shocked this place and this country. Generations who attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School finally felt believed. But truth has brought new burdens here, the weight of what continues to be revealed, and the scrutiny of a country they say talks reconciliation, but has yet to deliver. This is the Fifth Estate. In its day, it was the largest residential school in all of Canada, home to thousands of children who'd been ripped from their own homes in BC's interior and beyond.
We were really poor. We were poor. My mother made most of the clothes. This is my older sister, Marge. This one is me. This one's my brother Gary and my older brother Steve. If you see, we're all smiling. And if you look in the eyes, we're happy, right?
This is all before the school.
All before the school, yes.
I knew it wasn't going to be a good place the first step that I put into the building. All of my siblings, we all went in together. And we were in this little room. The priests and nuns came, and my brothers went that way, and my sisters went that way, and I'd never seen them again. I'd see them, but we never talked.
They took Marvin away, and they took me away. But we held each other so tight. We were screaming because I didn't want to leave him and he didn't want to leave me. We held each other and held each other. They had to pry us apart. And they finally pried us apart and they took me to the residential school, and I don't know where they took my brother.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
The purpose of the school was assimilation, set up by the Canadian government and run by the Catholic Church. Propaganda from the time portrayed it as a hopeful place, even a loving place.
Good night, girls, and God bless you.
But today, we know better. This school, like so many residential schools, was a place of horror.
We were down playing, and this tall guy, real tall guy, called me out to the hall. He guided me downstairs, just told me to come with him, and I did. But I didn't know what was going to happen. I went down into the furnace room with him where the laundry gets done, and there's a big furnace downstairs. And there's a flat bed down there where they fold laundry, I guess. That's where he laid me. I was 6 years old.
Sexual abuse was common at the school.
It happened lots. Brothers, priests, and I don't know who the other guys were. But it always happened downstairs.
Common, too, was death. Residential school children died at much higher rates of influenza and tuberculosis. And then there were the other deaths.
After church, we usually had to go for a walk, and we walked from the school. We'd go down by the barn, and you go walk between that and the river. And looking at the barn, there were 4 young boys hanging.
From what?
I would assume ropes. They were hanging down. They weren't at the roof. Their feet weren't on the floor. They were just hanging.
She asked about the boys several times and was disciplined.
Because I kept asking, I got called in to take my punishment to learn to shut up.
It wasn't unusual for children to just disappear. In 2015, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission identified 3,200 children who died at residential schools. The commission's head believes the real number could be 20,000 or more. At the Kamloops school, 51 children were named as having died, but those are just the documented cases. What haunts this place are the undocumented, the missing children who never made it home.
Strange things happen that you don't put 2 and 2 together till you're older and you start learning about the world. Why wasn't the RCMP there to investigate? How come there wasn't a coroner? Of course, when they're that young age, you don't know about the RCMP. You don't know about coroners. But as you go on, it sort of makes you curious.
As an 8-year-old, Norman's best friend went missing, a boy who slept 2 beds away and who Norman suspected was also sexually abused, as he was.
He was simple, I guess you'd say. He had special needs. So one day he was gone. We shared a little cubbyhole box, and all of a sudden one day his toothpaste, toothbrush, and comb were gone. But I didn't want to ask anybody what happened to him.
So what do you think happened to him?
Wow. You know, all I can do is speculate that he might be one of them down there.
What makes you say that?
He's vulnerable. And then in order to cover everything, they would just put him in the hole down in the orchard.
In the absence of concrete physical evidence, speculation is all they've had for years. That and stories passed down through generations. Chief Michael Laborde heard the stories all his life from his uncle.
He said there were times when he was early teens that the priest or a brother would come up to the junior boys. And they would pick 4 of them. And they would make 2 fight each other. And they would make the other 2 fight each other. And then they would make the winners fight each other. And then they would take the winner or the loser away. And there were times that it was my uncle. And they would make him dig a hole down by the apple trees. And it wasn't long before they caught on, they being the boys, that they were digging graves.
How did they know they were graves?
Dig a hole, somebody's missing. Dig a hole, somebody's missing. Dig a hole, somebody's missing.
What did your uncle say about what that was like for him?
I don't know. He breaks down. He breaks down.
One person asked if I could see the riverbank from my dorm. I told her no. And she cried and says, I'm glad you couldn't. Because I was one of them that buried them.
She buried children. Did she tell you anything more about that?
No. No. She was in so much distress. The only thing we could do is just hold her and hug her.
So the revelation last spring that the apple orchard might well contain graves resurfaced painful memories and long-buried questions. Jennifer always knew she wasn't the only girl abused at the school. What happened to the others?
We screamed, right?
What do you mean?
I'm not allowed to scream. Maybe they screamed and they ended up in the grave. They wouldn't stop screaming.
For generations, the stories were shared in whispers. But last spring, the Tk'emlúps First Nation made a decision to see if science could confirm what oral tradition told them.
We're looking for a grave shaft for the most part. We can't see bones, we can't see bodies. Okay, we're on line 9.
Archaeologist Sarah Bollier is an expert in ground-penetrating radar. She and her team were hired to look for unmarked graves, starting with the apple orchard.
A grave shaft is a soil disturbance. When you dig a grave and then you put the soil back on top of it, that stratigraphy changes from where the burial is. And so I'm looking for that soil disturbance for the most part.
I've always known since I was a little kid that there was children that were buried.
Dina Jules is the driving force behind the effort. She runs the local museum at the community's heritage park, land that includes the old orchard.
To me, these children are real. It's like, not that they're my children, but it's like I'm a caretaker of them.
My whole life, it was something you grew up knowing. It's like, you know, the sky is blue without really talking about the sky being blue. You just know.
Ted Godfredson oversees the museum. In 2019, they got some grant money to upgrade the park.
It's a park that we've established, and it has traditional plants. It has some traditional dwellings, that sort of thing. So we applied for funding to get some maintenance work done there, upgrade it a bit.
But then came COVID. The maintenance was canceled. And all of a sudden, there was money to spend.
So we met, and Dina, she said we should look for the kids.
We don't have any information confirming where they are. So I said, I want to, for my own, comfort, I guess, is I want to confirm where they are.
The work started on the May-long weekend. Dr. Beaulier looking for what she calls subsurface anomalies.
When you have a potential coffin or casket or box or a shrouded burial, these can show up differently. Whether it be wood or metal, it reflects differently on the screen. The time of the burial as well, if it's pre-mechanical excavation, the burials tend to be a little bit more shallow, or if they were excavated in the winter. And the depth of burial is also affected by the size of the individual as well. So children's burials would be shallower than an adult burial. And so these are all different things that I'm considering when I'm looking at anomalies.
That weekend, Ted and Dina were among the very few who knew the work was happening, and he didn't have a lot of expectations.
Maybe there's none. Hopefully there's none, right? I didn't want to see it happening as it unfolded. Emotionally, that would have been too hard for me. I know that about myself.
But Dina made a point of going to the orchard to watch the survey and to comfort the children she believes can hear her.
I said, don't be afraid. They are just here looking for you. They are going to be confirming what our oral history has told us, what I've always known. It's going to be okay. We're here to find you, finally.
No one was prepared for the scale of what they found.
Doesn't quite hit you until you've taken a look at all of it and seen the big picture. I think the moment was when we were doing a walkthrough of the site before I left with the community, and the silence. The silence was significant, and it was in that moment where you realize that this is awful.
Dina called me on Sunday and said, there's 215 graves down here. I just couldn't believe it. I kept repeating it. I said, did you say 215? Yeah. 215? Yeah.
215, I thought, like 215. That means 215 children in this area. I was devastated. I was devastated because how many families that is going to be impacting?
The burden of telling those families, of sharing the information with her community, fell on Tk'emlúps chief, Roseanne Casimir.
We are here for truth-telling. I had no idea what the reaction was going to be. I had no idea. All I knew is I'm delivering this horrific message, this horrific, gory information of 215 preliminary findings of unmarked graves. I want to begin by acknowledging Indian residential school survivors and intergenerational survivors. We see you, we love you, and we believe you.
I never had a life for 65 years. From the time I was abused until they found 215. I never had one good breath. It gave me a permission to tell my story.
I had so much feelings going through me in a matter of seconds. A lot of anger, and then tears, saying, yeah, I knew. I said, finally, the children were heard. The children were heard.
I couldn't breathe, I couldn't talk. I wanted to phone my daughter, but I couldn't. I wanted to phone my son, but I couldn't. All I kept saying is, now they know. Now they know.
The reaction took everyone by surprise. The shoes, the t-shirts, the outpouring of emotion.
A devastating discovery has been made in Canada. The remains of 215 children have been found buried.
This community in the middle of BC became the focus of worldwide attention.
Discovery and part of a dark history.
The remains of more than 200 Indigenous children were found.
And soon a destination for thousands of Canadians simply wanting to say, we hear you. For those who survived the school, it was as if a dam had finally broken. More stories started coming out, even more horrific. Many of them about what happened downstairs in that furnace room.
I remember being down there one time and I was laying there and I turned my head, as I always did, and there was a coat hanger and blood on the towels or sheets, and you could smell the blood. And I didn't know what it was then.
Do you know what it was now?
It's probably girls having miscarriages or getting abortions, or that's what I feel it is now.
A lot of the girls that were sexually assaulted there became pregnant. What happened to those babies?
For years, the answer to that was also whispered. But now the whispers were being spoken out loud.
Gentleman came up and asked if I was ever in the furnace room. I told him I was in there once. I never wanted to go back there again, and I never did go back there again. He was saying, yeah. And he started crying too. He said, that was a horrible place.
What did he say happened in the furnace room?
He said he put babies in there.
He put babies in?
He said he was given a box to put in there. He didn't know what it was. And then he was going to put it in there, and the baby fell out.
Do you believe the stories that say that they put babies in the incinerator?
Yeah.
It's such a hard thing to comprehend, isn't it?
Not when you live with stuff like that, with people disappearing and students going missing. It's not that hard to believe. When you hear enough about it, and there is no other explanation of where these babies went, where these students went.
Mm-hmm.
They sure as heck didn't up and walk out.
Oh, Creator, grandfathers and grandmothers, I pray that you will help all of the little ones that are down here.
I pray that you'll help them find the peace that they need so that they'll be able to travel back home.
Every Friday afternoon, the apple orchard beside the former Kamloops Indian Residential School comes alive with the sound of drumming and singing. A procession of remembrance for the more than 200 former students they believe are buried here.
We have to keep praying to them. We have to keep letting them know that they are not forgotten, that they will never be forgotten. I know they're there. Lots of other people know they're there. But until they are excavated, there'll always be those people that will say, well, maybe they're not.
We do get those folks that believe we're lying, that believe we're doing this for money, that, you know, we're just manipulators, I guess would be a word to use. I've even had emails that said that they were probably just brats anyway. I'm like, these are people that I don't understand how they can feel that way towards any other human being.
I have no doubt that there are burials there. Ground penetrating radar is the scientific approach, but we really need to hold Indigenous knowledge systems, oral tellings, to an equal space. A number of the anomalies are smaller. They are shallower, which is indicative of a child's burial. But to know what type of remains they are, whether they're adult, child, ancestral, you wouldn't know until you excavated.
And that presented the Tk'emlúps Nation with a dilemma.
For our people, it's really bad to exhume anyone. You know, their final resting place is actually sacred ground, in every sense of the word. They must be left alone. We do have elders who do want those children to stay there, without a doubt. But our committee has discussed it, and they have said that they should be exhumed.
I went around the table asking all of the family heads what they felt should happen. And every one of the representatives said those little ones should be sent home, because that's what we would want.
Former Tk'emlúps chief Manny Jules heads the committee that made the decision to exhume.
Our number one job is to make sure that they have a safe return home with all of the honor and respect that they didn't receive in life, that they're given in their afterlife.
But identifying remains takes DNA analysis. Determining how someone died requires even more work.
It's a very slow process. In order to identify the remains, it really depends on how well preserved they are or not. So it's questionable whether DNA analysis can be done. Forensically, looking at trauma, same thing. It really depends on how well preserved the bones are. And so I don't think you really know until you begin excavating what you're going to find.
We need answers. The families need answers. Communities need answers. The world needs answers.
What's the question that you want answered?
The biggest thing is it's looked at as a crime scene with that many children, potential children that are in unmarked graves. So it's finding those answers. And we know that we can't find those answers alone.
The community has already approached the United Nations for help. There are international protocols for excavating unmarked graves, and Tk'emlúps feels the pressure to get this right. Since their discovery, more than a dozen other Indigenous communities have started their own investigations into suspected grave sites. A grim trend the Prime Minister recognized last summer in announcing a new holiday.
This week, we will be marking the very first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It'll be an important moment for all Canadians to reflect on the historic legacy of harm that residential schools has created.
I invited him to come to unearthed to honor that day with us. But I also put it out there that if he couldn't be in attendance, that we really would love if he could provide a video clip, a minute or 2 minutes, You know, acknowledging the day, acknowledging our survivors, acknowledging, you know, the significance of that day and what it means to all of us.
Last September 30th, as all of that was acknowledged in Tk'emlúps in a ceremony broadcast on national television, the Prime Minister was nowhere to be seen. He was in BC, it turned out, on holiday.
Why not in person, sir?
Tracked down by journalists to a Vancouver Island beach.
I was angered. I just thought, wow, you know, he is over there, but didn't have the time to send regrets or send a video. So I really had to bite my tongue.
She wasn't biting her tongue a few weeks later when a chastened Prime Minister finally showed up.
Today is about making some positive steps forward and rectifying a mistake.
I am here today to say I wish I had been here a few weeks ago, and I deeply regret it.
I don't think I've ever seen him in a position where he was ever receiving a scolding before. For me, you know, I wasn't about, you know, wanting to humiliate or, you know, to be aggressive. What I wanted to be was truthful about the pain that we all felt.
It is a relationship still filled with tension. The government's promises of help so often contradicted by its actions. To know who went missing from the school, the community first needs to know who was enrolled. And for that, it needs records.
We require your support to ensure that full and complete disclosure of records that are held by the Canadian government and the church, specifically the student attendance records.
All the records in possession of the federal government have already been turned over to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg.
But that wasn't true, as the government itself admitted 2 months later. 12,000 documents had been deliberately withheld for more than a decade, part of an undisclosed agreement with the Catholic Church.
Di 215 bambini alunni della Kamloops Indian Residential School.
For the church as well, the Tk'emlúps discovery has been chastening. In June, the Pope acknowledged the 215, but once again fell short of the apology so many have long demanded. As churches became targets for arsonists in several Indigenous communities last summer, the tension in Tk'emlúps was between those who believe the church is ready to reconcile with survivors and those who don't.
Why do you trust the church?
It's all about reconciliation. You can't solve these issues by talking to yourself. These are matters of international importance. It isn't just about Canada. It's about Canada's standing internationally. And it's about the church and their long history of dealing with First Nations. You can't resolve those issues by wishing them away. You have to fundamentally sit down and say, you did wrong, let's fix that.
There's some people in this community who say, in the spirit of reconciliation, we have to go forward with the Catholic Church because that's what reconciliation is. Do you agree with that?
Personally, I don't think I ever would. Because they knew what was happening. They didn't stop it any more than the government of Canada stopped it.
There's talk of the Pope coming maybe even to Kamloops to apologize.
For another photo op. To me, that's all I think it is.
And if reconciliation means forgiveness, some may never make it. Chief Michael Labordi never attended the residential school, but his mother did, and was damaged.
Sexual abuse. Physical abuse. She's deaf in one ear from being punched. All of it. Everything you hear about it. She's the most beautiful woman on this planet. I can't imagine the assholes that did this shit to her. I hope there's a hell. She didn't deserve it.
Eventually, the crowds and the well-wishers go home, and a community is left to move on.
For me, it's like now we can start to heal because we know where the children are. People in the world know that these things really happened.
Last October, the mountains of gifts and mementos that had been brought to Tk'emlúps were burned. An offering to those now in the spirit world, they believe. And for those left behind, an affirmation of their strength.
You think of the lost potential. I think of the fear they must have felt. That's a different type of sorrow, you know, that missed opportunity. That potential is a big one for me. What could have been for those kids.
And then there are those who survived, who struggle to overcome decades of trauma and shame.
It was harder for me to forgive myself that than it was for me to forgive the abusers. We paid it wasn't going to be us. But the guilt, when that other person didn't come back to their bed, that was something we had to live with. And that was the hardest thing to forgive.
My family were the hereditary chiefs of the Little Old Indian Band. I should walk around with pride, but no. The school taught me to be ashamed of who I am. My children are affected. My grandchildren are certainly affected. Generations are affected because I was abused, because I didn't have any parenting skills. When you don't feel like a man, you spend your whole life trying to be one. And in some ways, you become an overachiever. You're trying so hard to belong to the human race.
I had a hard time with the word reconciliation because it was used so freely by so many different powers to be. And I thought about it and I said, for me, it started here. I have to start here. I have to reconcile with me. Once I deal and absorb and get out in the open and say, I forgive you, then I can start being a person and take all of them little walls down that I put around myself.
What they did to me, they put a lot of fear in me at the residential school. I was just so afraid, so scared. I'm scared to speak up. I'm scared to, because every time I spoke up, I'd be told to shut up. There's a lot of damage in me. I couldn't even love my kids. I couldn't even love my grandchildren. And I have 2 great-grandchildren. I don't know how to love them.
Until this interview, Jennifer had never shared her story, not even with her children. Since the discovery, she's not been able to return to the school, even though she wants to.
I'm trying to bring my spirit out of there, take my spirit home. It's just the memories there, it's just awful, and I'm just scared I might fall apart when I get there.
How close have you gotten?
I made it up to the grass. I seen this chair there, and I said, I'm gonna make it to that chair. I still haven't made it to that chair yet, but I'm gonna.
The full magnitude of what happened here won't be known for years. The former school is surrounded by 160 acres that will now also be searched. But whatever truths are eventually excavated from Brother Joseph's orchard and beyond, the fact remains that for this community, for this country, what happened here last May changed everything.
The reality of the grisly discovery led the majority of Canadians for the first time to see with open eyes, to hear for the first time the words of the residential school survivors, that indeed what happened wasn't our fault.
After overcoming years of alcoholism, Norman Rataskett is today an addictions counselor and a renowned drum maker. Audrey Baptiste survived to become a mother of 3, grandmother to 10. Harvey McLeod has been chief of the Upper Nicola Band for 8 years now. And in November, Jennifer Camille, accompanied by her daughter, finally made it all the way back to the school.
I know I'm a strong person, and I know who I am, and I know I have to do this for me.
No.